Hi, my name's Calder Reese. My brother, the one I trusted most, stole everything. My wife slept with him. My daughter, they tried to ship her overseas to erase me. And me, I was left in a motel room with nothing but silence until I opened a drawer and found a metal box. My name was engraved on it. Inside was 70 grand, a key, and a note that read, "This isn't the end. The truth awaits you." So here's my question for you. What would you do if the people who knew you best were the ones who wanted you gone? Because me, I didn't just lose everything. I found something bigger. And now, I'm taking it back. I remember that night the way you remember a scar. You don't feel the pain anymore, but it still burns when you touch it. That evening in Austin was warm, the kind of air that hangs heavy before a storm. Back then, I thought my life was steady. I co-ran our family construction firm with my older brother, Harlan. We'd built homes all across Travis County, modern, clean, built to last. I used to believe our business, like our family, stood on a foundation of trust. Marla, my wife, had dinner ready most nights when I came home. Our daughter, Lydia, 8 years old, had this laugh that could make a whole house feel alive. That morning, I'd kissed Marla goodbye like always. She'd smiled, though something in her eyes didn't quite meet mine. I brushed it off. You do that when you love someone. You explain away the little alarms ringing in your chest. I didn't know that morning coffee with my brother would be the last time I called him family. It was around 8 that night when my phone buzzed, a calendar invite from Harlan's assistant. Strategy meeting, urgent, HQ boardroom, 9 p.m. I almost ignored it. Marla said she was meeting friends, and Lydia had fallen asleep early. The house was too quiet. Maybe I just didn't want to sit in that silence. So I grabbed my jacket and drove downtown. The office looked hollow at that hour. Only one light glowed on the second floor. Harlan's office. I parked under the streetlight, checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages. Inside, the place smelled of sawdust and lemon cleaner, the kind of scent that always reminded me of my father. I walked the hallway slowly, my shoes echoing against the tile. Then I heard it. Laughter. Soft. Familiar. Marla's. At first I froze, thinking I must have imagined it. But then came another sound, a deeper chuckle I'd known my whole life. Harlan. I stood before his frosted glass door, the silhouettes moving behind it, two shapes too close for anything business-related. My stomach turned to stone. Every instinct told me to walk away, pretend I never came. But curiosity is a cruel thing. It doesn't whisper. It pulls. I pushed the door open. The moment that followed carved itself into my bones. Marla sat on the edge of Harlan's desk, blouse half open, her lipstick smudged. Harlan was behind her, shirt undone, his face pale now, caught mid-breath. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The clock on the wall ticked louder than anything else in the room. "You weren't supposed to see this," Harlan said finally, calm like a man caught but unashamed. Marla's eyes locked on mine, cold, detached. "You never were supposed to be here, Calder. There are sounds you never forget. The crash of a world collapsing doesn't make noise like in the movies. It's quiet, like the last breath before drowning." I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I just turned, stepped back into the hall, and left. The drive home blurred past streetlights and stop signs. I remember gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. My brain replayed it over and over, his hands on her, her voice, their laughter, the kind that used to belong to me. I asked myself where I'd gone wrong. Maybe I'd worked too hard. Maybe I hadn't worked enough. Maybe being the quiet one made me easy to replace. When I reached home, the porch light was on. Through the window, I saw boxes, my boxes, stacked neatly by the door. The house smelled like her perfume and endings. On the kitchen counter sat a manila envelope, my name on it. Inside, pre-divorce papers, already signed. I remember my knees going weak. There was a note attached, her handwriting clean and sharp. You'll die poor and alone. You always mistook kindness for strength. A minute later, my phone buzzed, a text from Harlan. Enjoy what you've lost. I stood there, the silence pressing down until it was unbearable. I left the house, drove without direction. I ended up at a roadside motel off I-35, paid cash. The clerk didn't even look up when I signed the form. Inside the room, the walls were stained with years of someone else's misery. I sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow above me. My hands shook, not from anger, but emptiness. I realized some betrayals don't need knives. They come dressed as family, holding pens. Hours passed. The city outside went quiet. My phone lit up again, then dimmed, over and over. I didn't check. I didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been said. At some point, I turned on my side. My hand brushed the drawer handle of the nightstand. I hesitated, thumb resting against the cool metal. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe habit, maybe hope. But I remember thinking, if there's nothing inside, then maybe I really have nothing left. When I pulled it open, my life didn't end. It shifted. I didn't expect anything. That drawer might as well have been empty space in a room built for people trying to forget. But when my hand closed around the edge and pulled it open, something solid shifted inside. A metal box. Not large, not heavy, just enough to take up space. Its corners were rounded, its surface dulled by time, the kind of thing that'd normally go unnoticed in a thrift shop. But it wasn't the box itself that stopped my breath. It was the name, etched right across the top in small, precise lettering, Calder Reese. I stared at it for a long minute, expecting it to vanish. It didn't. I rubbed my hand across the lid, dust coming off in a fine smear across my palm. 100 thoughts ran through my mind. None of them made sense. Was this some kind of sick prank? Did the motel staff do this? Did Harlan? I glanced at the door, still bolted, then looked up. The ceiling fan spun slow and steady, ignoring the storm crackling outside. Rain had picked up, sharp drops tapping the window in uneven rhythm. It sounded like someone pacing. I set the box on the edge of the bed, sat down slowly. My palms were damp, though the room was cold. The lid didn't resist when I opened it. It creaked just once, like a whisper that hadn't decided if it should speak. Inside, a small brass key, an envelope bulging thick, cash, I guessed, and a folded note. I picked up the envelope first. Inside was cash. A lot of it. I didn't count, but I didn't have to. I'd seen enough payouts in my life to know what 70 grand looked like. My chest tightened. Next, the note. This isn't the end. The truth awaits you. That was it. No name, no date. Just one sentence, like a fuse waiting to be lit. My fingers curled around the paper. Who would leave something like this? Who would know I'd end up here, in this motel room, on this night? Was I being watched? I stood up quickly, moved to the window. Just dark highway beyond the neon flicker of the motel sign. A truck passed in the distance, its headlights painting brief ghosts across the wall. Back on the bed, the key sat still. I held it up to the light. A brass key, slightly worn, no label. Not a house key. Maybe storage. A locker. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring at it. My brain ran in circles. Was this another game from Harlan? A twisted way to keep me guessing? Then another thought broke through. Uncle Edward. He died years ago. A quiet man, kept to himself mostly, but sharp. I remembered his funeral, rainy like tonight. Harlan had barely shown up, called Edward's will old man rambling, and left before the service ended. But Edward had said something to me once, years before he passed. I hadn't thought of it in a long time. You'll know what's yours when they take what's not. At the time, I figured he was talking about inheritance, maybe land or stocks. But now, in this moment, it hit different. Maybe he wasn't talking about money. Maybe he knew this would happen. Maybe this box, this key, was what was mine. A new thought began to form, one I hadn't had since the betrayal. What if I wasn't finished? I looked at the envelope of money again. I didn't touch it. Not yet. That wasn't what this was about. The note hadn't said, "Spend this." It said truth. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small pendant my daughter had made me last Christmas. A tiny green bead on a string. I slipped the key onto it, tying it securely next to the pendant, then looped it around my neck. It felt right, like armor. My breath steadied. I stood up and turned off the TV. Static buzzed for a second before it went dark. I grabbed the folded city map from the motel desk drawer, an old habit from working job sites in different counties, spread it across the bed. I marked down every storage facility, every place that could take a key like this. There were more than I thought. Lightning flashed, lighting up the room for a brief second. The box cast a shadow that reached toward me like it wanted to be opened again. I looked at it, then looked away. There was something heavy in the air now, not fear, not quite hope either, but something close, a reason to move. The news on the TV had been covering another scandal. A family-owned business in Dallas had imploded from the inside. Embezzlement, betrayal, siblings turning on each other. I turned the volume off but left the screen on. It felt fitting. I pocketed the key, stood still for a beat, listening to the rain calm to a steady rhythm. I turned off the lamp. The room dimmed, only the window's dull glow remaining. And that's when it caught my eye. The brass key on my chest, now glowing faintly in the last sliver of light. Whoever left that box knew the truth would destroy more than lies ever could. I didn't sleep that night. I just laid there, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the hum of the fridge and the occasional rattle of the window frame each time the wind kicked up. That brass key resting on my chest felt like a weight, but not the kind that drags you down. More like a reminder, a pulse of purpose. By the time the sky turned from black to gray, I was already behind the wheel of my truck. I'd circled half a dozen locations on that motel map, but something about the one on the far edge of the city, Lock and Key Storage, kept calling me. The name felt like a whisper from the past. The streets were still slick from the overnight rain. The wipers kept a slow rhythm, brushing mist off the windshield. My GPS glitched twice, rerouted me into a dead-end alley once, then finally led me out toward an old industrial strip on the east side of Austin. Warehouses, train tracks, broken signage. The kind of place you'd expect to find things people didn't want to be found. The building was long, rusted, and quiet. Lock and Key Storage. The paint was peeling but still legible. I pulled into the gravel lot. The office sat off to the side, a glass window fogged with condensation. Inside, a woman in her 60s sat behind the counter. She wore a worn cardigan and thick glasses perched low on her nose. When I held up the brass key and asked if it meant anything to her, she gave it a quick glance, then looked closer. 47B, she muttered, pulling out a battered ledger from beneath the desk. Hasn't been touched in years. No payment, no activity. I'm surprised the lock still works. I signed the logbook, thanked her, and followed her directions to the back row. Unit 47B sat under a flickering light. The padlock looked old, but the key turned smoothly. The metal door screeched as I rolled it upward. The inside smelled like dust and motor oil. Cobwebs clung to the corners. 3 boxes, 1 filing cabinet. That was it. And taped to the front drawer of the cabinet, an envelope. For CR. I tore it open with shaking hands. Inside, another note, handwritten. The penmanship was unmistakable. Tight loops, sharp strokes. My Uncle Edward. If you're reading this, they've already taken what was yours, but you still hold what they can't steal, your name. I stood still, reading it twice, maybe 3 times. My chest tightened. I opened the drawer. Inside were file folders stacked neatly. Some had legal headers, company holdings, transfer approvals, board signatures. Others were marked with old dates. One caught my eye. Confidential memo. Ownership revisions. Internal only. I sat down on an overturned crate and started reading. By the time I finished the 3rd folder, my hands were trembling. 10 years ago, Harlan had begun drafting quiet changes, legal loopholes, fake board approvals, silent transfers. My shares in the company, the ones passed down from Dad, had been chipped away slowly, year by year. Paper? It looked consensual. My signature was there, on every page, but I knew better. These weren't forms I ever remembered signing. Insurance updates, he'd said. Just cleaning up the books. Back then, I trusted him. We'd toast at every groundbreaking, pose for local papers together. I remember Lydia running through the hallways of the office, drawing little pictures on my notepads. Marla would bring lunch sometimes. Harlan would joke about her being the prettier boss. God. I slammed the drawer shut and pressed my palms to my face. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a con. A long game played by someone who looked me in the eye every day and smiled. And I let him. I looked down at the brass key again. It had never been about opening a door. It was a test. A compass. Something to make sure I still had the sense to follow the trail. I opened the drawer again and found one last folder. Company holdings, transfer drafts. On top of it, I set the brass key. It sat there, plain as anything. You wanted me blind, Harlan, I said aloud. But you forgot. My name's still on the lock. I didn't take everything with me, just what mattered. The folders that proved the forgery. The letter from Edward. I packed it into a cardboard box and set it on the passenger seat. As I pulled out of the lot, the sun was just beginning to break through the clouds. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt damp and cold. At the first red light, I glanced at my reflection in the side mirror. I looked older. Not just tired, changed. But I wasn't hollow anymore. The anger hadn't disappeared. It was still there. But now, it was colder, sharper, focused. I tightened my grip on the wheel. It's time they remembered who built this family. The morning air was heavy with something unspoken, thicker than fog, colder than the leftover rain clinging to the curb. I pulled into the Reese & Co. lot, parked in the same spot I had for 15 years, right under the oak tree Dad planted when we first opened the doors. My name used to be on the plaque at the front. I didn't even bother checking if it was still there. I stepped inside the lobby. It hit me harder than I expected. How unfamiliar everything suddenly looked. New artwork on the walls, sleeker reception desk, cleaner lines, colder colors. Progress, I guess, but not the kind that came with respect. A few employees passed me, eyes flicked up, then down. One guy, Ben, from logistics, opened his mouth like he might say something, then thought better of it. A young woman at reception, new face, looked confused for a second, then stiffened as I approached. "Mr. Reese, the board meeting's already in session," she said almost apologetically. "Yeah," I replied with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "That's all right. They won't mind a late addition." I kept walking through the marble-floored hallway that used to carry my footsteps with pride. Now each step echoed like a stranger's. As I passed the display wall, I paused. Something was missing. I used to stand here with clients, proud of that row of portraits. My father, my uncle, me, and Harlan. We were the story of the company, the legacy. But now, only Harlan's picture remained. The others, gone. Even mine. In place of my name, the plaque read, "Founded by Harlan Reese, CEO." They didn't just take my company, I muttered under my breath. They took my history. I moved on, letting that thought settle into my bones. The double doors to the boardroom were already cracked open, voices murmuring inside. I didn't knock. I pushed them wide and stepped in. Silence. The room stilled like someone had pulled the power. Every head turned. Half the faces I knew, half I didn't. But I recognized the smell of tension a mile away. On the projector, a bright slide read, "Transition of ownership official." And there he was, Harlan at the head of the table, calm, composed, like a man reading from a script he wrote years ago. "Calder," he said smoothly, as if he were greeting me at a barbecue. "We were just talking about you. Have a seat." I scanned the table. My seat, my actual seat, had a new nameplate. Marla Reese. She sat in my chair, wearing my initials on her name. Neat blazer, fresh lipstick, that smile she wore when she was about to cut deep and make it look graceful. Before I could speak, she raised her chin and said, "It's official, Calder. You're free." The words landed like a slap, cold, clean, final. I took a breath. "You can't just," Harlan cut in. "You signed the forms. Years ago. Remember? I only finalized what you started." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was surgical, polite enough to seem professional, sharp enough to draw blood. I turned to Marla, hoping, God knows why, for something human in her expression. But her eyes danced around the room, never landing on mine. Her hands rested gently on the papers in front of her like they belonged there. I looked around the table. The board members fidgeted. A couple cleared their throats. No one looked me in the eye. I could have shouted, could have flipped the table, could have ripped the screen from the wall. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I watched. Closely. The slide on the projector had a timestamp, one that didn't align with the board's last recorded meeting. Marla's signature on the documents, too perfect, almost traced. The company lawyer, Carl. He avoided my glance like it would burn him. When you've lost everything, I thought, silence stops being weakness. It becomes reconnaissance. I stood still. My palms rested on the back of the empty chair beside me. I spoke softly. "You know, this boardroom used to feel like a heartbeat, alive, grounded, built on sweat and trust." Harlan leaned back in his chair. "That was then." I nodded slowly. "You may own the building, Harlan, but you'll never own the foundation." That line landed with more weight than I expected. A few faces twitched. Someone near the end of the table shifted uncomfortably. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out. Security was already moving from the far side of the room. Not rushing, not hostile. Just there, like a reminder, like a quiet wall between me and what used to be mine. They didn't escort me, but they didn't need to. The elevator doors opened. I stepped in. As they closed, I caught a final glimpse of the boardroom through the glass, the faces, the power postures, the smiles hiding knives. Then they were gone. I looked at myself in the elevator mirror, pale, hollow-eyed. But something in my face had changed. Not broken, sharpened. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But the message caught me mid-thought. They forged more than your name. Check what's under Unit 47B. I stared at the screen. The message pulsed like a heartbeat. And just like that, the game changed again. The text was still on my screen when the rain began. Heavy, hard, relentless. Like someone was drumming on the roof of my truck to make sure I didn't forget what I'd lost. I didn't even wait for daylight. I just drove. Headlights cutting through sheets of rain, tires hissing against the asphalt, wipers beating like a metronome for my thoughts. The further I got from the city, the darker it grew. By the time I reached the industrial outskirts, the sky had turned the color of wet steel. The sign for lock and key storage flickered weakly through the storm. I parked far from the office this time, near the chain-link fence. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I walked toward Unit 47B. When you've already lost everything, I whispered to myself. Trespassing doesn't feel like a crime. It feels like collecting evidence. The key slid into the lock like it had been waiting. The rain drowned out everything. The sound of the shutter, my breath, the faint ringing in my ears that hadn't stopped since that boardroom scene. I stepped inside, flashlight beam cutting through dust and damp air. The cabinet drawers were open, emptied. The floor glistened slightly where water had seeped in. I knelt down, running the light slowly across the concrete until something caught. A faint, unnatural scrape near the back corner. My hand brushed over it, found the edge of a thin panel that didn't quite match the rest of the floor. I dug my nails under it and pried it loose. Underneath sat a waterproof plastic case, sealed tight with gray industrial tape. No markings, just weight, enough to make my pulse quicken. I dragged it out, wiped the grime off, and popped the latches. Inside were several USB drives labeled by year, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and a thick ledger stamped internal, confidential. My hands trembled as I held them. This wasn't random storage. This was a record. The rain outside deepened into thunder. I didn't open anything there. I couldn't. The storm was picking up, lightning cracking close enough to rattle the walls. I packed the case into my truck and drove back toward the motel, windshield wipers losing their rhythm against the downpour. By the time I got inside, the room smelled like damp carpet and old coffee. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the drives. For a second, I thought about waiting until morning. But that's what I'd done my whole life. Waited for the right moment, the right proof, the right time to speak up. Not this time. I plugged one of the drives into my old laptop. The screen flickered, glitched twice, then stabilized. A video window opened automatically. Security footage from Reese & Co. headquarters. The timestamp read 3 years ago. Harlan was in the frame. So was Marla. And another man, Frank Denton, head of accounting. The three of them were seated around my old conference table. Marla's laugh was soft, almost affectionate. "He won't even notice," she said. Harlan leaned back, arms crossed, casual as if discussing lunch. He trusts me, always has. We'll just route the changes under his login. When the audit hits, we'll make it look like he adjusted the accounts himself. Frank hesitated. And if he asks questions? Harlan smirked. Then we remind him it was his idea. Marla added, he's too proud to admit he didn't understand the numbers. I froze the video. My breath caught. The timestamp. The audio clarity. Every frame screamed truth. 3 years ago. The same year the auditors questioned my transactions. The same year Harlan convinced me to take a step back for the sake of the company's image. They hadn't just betrayed me. They'd framed me. I sat there for a long time, staring at the frozen image of their faces. My own reflection shimmered faintly on the laptop screen. Hollow eyes, clenched jaw. A man who didn't recognize himself anymore. The rain outside hit harder. I slammed the laptop shut and stood, pacing. My pulse thundered in my ears. Every word, every memory, every smile I'd shared with them turned sour. They planned it, I whispered. Every meeting, every compliment. It was all a setup. I sank into the chair, rubbing my face with both hands. For a moment, the weight of it all threatened to crush me. Then I heard her voice, faint, soft, buried deep in memory. Dad, Lydia had said once, her tiny hand in mine. You said truth always wins, even if it takes forever. I looked at the closed laptop. My jaw tightened. Forever just ran out. I reopened it and got to work. For the next few hours, I cataloged everything. Each USB drive, every ledger, every file name. I cross-referenced signatures, document trails, transaction IDs. I started a folder of my own, labeled it The Foundation. It felt fitting. The company might have been stolen, but the foundation, the real truth, was still mine. By the time the rain began to fade, the clock read 4:27 a.m. The world outside had turned quiet again, the way it does just before dawn. I saved everything twice. One copy on a hard drive, one in a cloud backup. If they'd built their empire on deceit, I'd rebuild mine on exposure. They used my name to steal my company, I said to the empty room. I'll use the truth to take it back. It didn't sound like revenge anymore. It sounded like justice. I sat back, exhaled, and rubbed the stiffness from my neck. The metal box from the drawer still sat on the dresser, dull in the gray light. I ran my hand across it once, like it was a promise made in steel. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number, again. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen before I swiped. A voice came through, distorted, mechanical, calm. You're not the only one they fooled. Meet me tomorrow. Bring what you found. Then silence. I walked slowly to the window, pulling the curtain aside. Across the street, through the dim morning, haze, a black SUV idled, engine running, no headlights, just waiting. My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. If this was a trap, then it was one I was finally ready to walk into. I didn't sleep. The hours bled into each other as I sat in the dark, watching the street. That black SUV never moved. No lights, no engine hum, just presence. Like a threat without a weapon. Around 6, I showered, changed into something clean, tucked the flash drives into my inner coat pocket, and left. I didn't lock the motel room behind me. The diner sat on a quiet stretch of Route 290. The kind of place where the coffee was always burnt, the booths were cracked vinyl, and the regulars didn't ask names. A bell above the door jingled when I stepped in. I paused. The place smelled like grease and tired waitresses. A man sat alone in the back corner, facing the door. Gray stubble, worn leather jacket, a slight limp as he shifted in his seat, and on his wrist, My uncle's watch. When you see something you buried years ago show up on a stranger, your heartbeat doesn't quicken, it stops. I walked over slowly, keeping my hands visible, like I was stepping into a deal with the devil. You called her? He asked without looking up. His voice was rough, not menacing, just used to smoke and regret. I nodded. Who are you? He gestured for me to sit. I didn't. That watch, I said. Where'd you get it? His eyes finally met mine. Blue, pale, but clear. Edward gave it to me, 2 weeks before he died. I pulled out the seat across from him, sat down, then start talking. He reached into his jacket, slow, deliberate, and pulled out a manila folder, slid it across the table. Inside were photographs, grainy, black and white, but clear enough. Harlan, Marla, my Uncle Edward. The date printed in the bottom corner made my stomach twist. 2 weeks before Edward died. My name's Royden Cale, the man said. I worked for Edward, managed his estate. I wasn't family, but he trusted me more than any blood he had left. And you've been watching me? I asked, waiting. You weren't ready, not till now. I flipped through the photos. One showed Edward's front porch. Harlan and Marla stood side by side, fake smiles, hands tucked behind their backs. Another, Edward with a glass of something in his hand, looking weary. What is this supposed to mean? I asked. Royden leaned forward. Edward's death? It wasn't heart failure. I froze. He continued, voice low. I knew something was off. He'd been in good shape for his age, ate clean, exercised every day. After that meeting, he got sick, fast, and died before I could convince him to see a real doctor. You're saying my brother killed his own uncle? I asked. I'm saying, Royden said carefully, he killed the man who left everything to you. I didn't breathe for a moment. My chest felt hollow, like air wasn't enough anymore. He pulled another paper from his coat, faded handwriting, a draft of Edward's will, unsigned but clearly, naming me as sole heir. He was going to finalize it the week after that visit. Then he got sick. I looked at the watch again. My uncle had worn it every day. He'd once told me, this watch never lied to me. It ticks when I do right, and it chokes when I don't. I reached out, touched the metal, still warm from Royden's wrist. Why now? I asked. Why come forward? Because I failed him, Royden replied. I saw what was happening and did nothing. But I've got a contact, someone inside Harlan's legal team. They've got documents, emails, proof that your brother's been cleaning house for years, hiding the bodies under marble floors. I didn't speak, just stared at the papers, the photos, the watch. Every truth I found came with a corpse attached. What do you want? I finally asked. Redemption, Royden said, and a piece of justice. That's it. I leaned back, crossed my arms. If you lie to me, Royden, you'll wish Harlan found you first. He didn't blink, just nodded like he'd expected that line. The waitress came by, poured us both coffee. Neither of us touched it. He reached across the table. I shook his hand. Calloused, firm, the grip of a man who'd carried too much silence for too long. As we stood to leave, I glanced down once more at that silver watch. It ticked softly, steady and certain beneath the diner's fluorescent hum. That watch once ticked on the wrist of a man who believed truth could outlive greed. Maybe he was right. We stepped outside. The air was heavy with humidity and unfinished storms. Across the street, the same black SUV idled, motionless, but not empty. I squinted. The plate read RSC Holdings. I didn't say a word, just stared. Royden muttered, Guess they're keeping tabs. They always did, I replied. We parted without another handshake. Some pacts don't need repeating. I waited until Royden disappeared behind the diner, then crossed the street to my truck. The SUV hadn't moved, but the moment I started the engine, its taillights blinked to life. Slow, deliberate, and it pulled away. I didn't follow immediately. I gave it 2 blocks, then slipped in behind at a distance. The roads were nearly empty. The storm had passed, but its scent lingered. Wet earth, broken branches, something unsettled. We drove northwest, weaving through the edge of Austin, past darkened estates with iron gates and too many security lights. I knew where we were heading before we even turned onto the hill. The Reese family estate. I hadn't set foot on that land in over 7 years. Not since the funeral. Not since the last time I believed my brother's lies. I parked halfway down the road, behind a row of trees thick enough to keep me hidden, turned off the engine. No streetlights out here. Just moonlight sharp enough to slice through memory. Every brick of that house was bought with my father's ambition and my silence. I slipped through the side woods, boots sinking into the soft ground. The gate behind the garden, the one the groundskeepers used back when we had staff, still creaked on its hinges. The place looked the same, and yet it didn't. The hedges were trimmed, the paint fresh, but the warmth was gone. Even in the moonlight, the windows looked cold. I moved quick but careful, avoiding the cameras I remembered too well. Inside, the back door gave way with a quiet click. Someone had forgotten to reset the deadbolt, or maybe someone wanted it left open. The halls were dim. A single light glowed above the grand staircase, casting long shadows over the portraits lining the wall. Faces of ancestors, smug and stiff in oil paint, stared down at me like judges. Then I saw us. Me and Harlan, maybe 10 years old, matching suits, awkward smiles. Edward stood behind us, his hand resting on my shoulder. The plaque read, "Legacy begins." Legacy didn't begin there, it died there. I turned left, down the hall behind the old library. The door to Harlan's study used to be hidden behind a sliding shelf. I pushed gently, and the wood groaned as it gave way. The air inside was stale, smelled of paper, dust, and expensive scotch. I moved fast, checking drawers, tapping panels. Then I saw it. A small safe, tucked behind a false panel in the desk, the initials ER etched into the front. My hand reached into my coat before I even thought about it. The brass key, the one from the motel, the one that started all of this, felt heavier now. It slid in with a quiet click. Inside, a small black video recorder, an envelope, a folded document, and a wooden cross the size of my thumb. I shut the door behind me and sank into the leather chair. Pushed play. The screen flickered. Then Edward appeared. Older, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were steady. "Calder," he began, his voice gravel and fatigue. "If this reaches you, I'm gone." He took a long breath. "I trusted Harlan. I shouldn't have. He's been using your name to build something ugly, forging signatures, contracts, loyalty. I didn't stop him when I should have, and for that, I'm sorry." He paused, a flicker of something behind his eyes. "Regret, maybe. You have to take it back, son, not for revenge, for the truth. But listen to me. Justice means nothing without mercy. If you lose that, you lose yourself." A knock echoed faintly in the background. Edward turned his head. Then the recording cut out. I sat frozen. The room around me silent but heavy. My fingers curled around the wooden cross. It was smooth from years of use. He must have held it often. I pressed it to my chest. I won't forgive him, I whispered, but I'll make him remember. I slid the envelope into my coat, turned off the recorder, and returned everything to the safe, except the cross. That stayed with me. As I slipped out through the side door, I noticed headlights. The same SUV sat parked just outside the gates. But now, someone was standing beside it, a silhouette, still and watching. I stepped closer, heart tight. For a moment, I thought it was Marla. Same height, same frame. But when the figure turned, moonlight caught her face. It was Ella's nanny. She didn't speak right away, just walked to me and pressed a small envelope into my palm. She knows everything, she whispered, and she's scared. Before I could ask, she turned and vanished into the trees. I stood alone, staring at the envelope, heart pounding louder than the silence. It felt warm from the nanny's hand, or maybe from the weight of what was inside. I didn't open it right away. I just held it, then slowly tucked it into my coat pocket and walked back through the trees toward the truck parked beneath a dying streetlight. Rain had picked up again, not the angry kind, just steady enough to soak through your collar. I drove without the radio, just windshield wipers and my own heartbeat. By the time I got back to the motel, it was nearing 4 a.m. The neon sign flickered pale blue across the lot. I let the door click shut behind me, sat on the edge of the bed, and peeled off my damp jacket. Then I pulled the envelope from the inside pocket and opened it. There were 5 drawings inside, crayon, folded once, neatly, the way a child would hand them to a teacher, or a father. The first one stopped me cold. It showed a man and a woman, blocky shapes, one with dark hair, the other with yellow scribbled curls, standing beside what looked like a square vault. A stick-figure child watched through a door cracked open. I didn't need names. I knew who they were. The next page showed the same child curled in a corner, tears streaming from 2 blue dots under big, fearful eyes. Another page had a building drawn crookedly, 4 windows, a door, and a sign above that read, Genevieve School. But it was the last drawing that sent something sharp down my spine. In thick red crayon, the words, "They said Daddy's bad. I don't believe them." My hand went to my mouth. I don't know if I was trying to hold back a sound or a scream. She saw. She heard. They didn't just betray me. They weaponized her, lied to her, tried to rewrite the one thing I thought no one could touch, the bond between a father and his daughter. I laid the pages out on the bed, one by one, trying to breathe slow. Adults write lies with contracts, I whispered. Children tell truth with crayons. As I reached for the 3rd page again, something felt off, heavier. I pinched the corner, ran a nail under the edge. A seam split. Inside, folded into a tiny square, was a note written in rushed, careful print. They're planning to send her to Geneva under a fake program next week. It's not school. It's custody. No name, no signature, but I knew it was the nanny, Geneva, my little girl, gone across the world under some bogus education plan, which meant no access, no rights, no court. They weren't just removing me. They were relocating the legacy, securing the company assets through guardianship, control by geography. My eyes burned, not from tears, from fury honed into purpose. I grabbed my phone, dialed Royden. It rang twice before he picked up. "You awake?" I asked. "I am now. What happened?" "They're moving her. 7 days." Long pause. Then, carefully, "If you go in angry—" "This isn't anger," I said. "It's precision." I ended the call without another word. I moved quickly now. USB drives, check. Edwards tape, still in its case. Drawings, folded and slid into a folder. I took the ledger from Unit 47B and tucked it with everything else into the metal box. Then, as I knelt to zip the bag, I saw something under the bed, a flash of green. I reached for it. Lena's pendant, the one she gave me the week the divorce papers were signed. She'd told me it was magic and could keep me brave. I remembered how I'd laughed, even as my heart cracked. I placed it beside Edward's wooden cross on the table. 2 small anchors, one carved by faith, the other drawn by love. That pendant was my first reminder of love, I whispered. Now it's my reason for war. The green stone caught the flicker of the neon outside, and for a split second, it glowed. Hope. Not the loud kind, the quiet, stubborn kind. I sat down at the desk, tore a scrap of paper from the motel notepad, and wrote one line. If I don't make it back, she'll know the truth, even if it kills me. I folded it, left it beneath the pendant and cross. Then I zipped the case, buttoned my coat, and stepped out into the mist. The lot was empty, or so I thought. As I walked toward the road, a car engine turned over softly. I turned my head. Same black SUV. Only this time, I was the one getting behind the wheel. The engine purred quietly beneath my hands, steady and obedient. A rare thing in my world lately. As I pulled out of the lot, the horizon began to blush with the first streaks of gold. Morning was coming fast. The road to the Reese estate cut through a blanket of fog, like a ghost from my past inviting me back to finish what it started. I didn't turn on the headlights. I didn't need them. I knew this road by memory. Every bump, every bend. In my mind, Edward's voice still echoed, Royden's warnings, Lena's drawings. But louder than them all was my own thought. For years I begged for fairness. This morning, I came to deliver it. As the SUV crept up the long private driveway, the mansion appeared. A silhouette of power built on years of lies. The gate had been left open. Or maybe it was never locked to keep out the one person who belonged. Parked discreetly near the tree line were 2 unmarked police cars. Royden had done his part. Now it was my turn. I stepped out, the metal box in one hand, the weight of everything else in the other. Inside, the main hall smelled like money and dust, still polished, still pristine. A mausoleum for morals long buried. I heard voices echoing from the den. Marla was tense, pacing. Harlan stood still, sipping something dark from a tumbler. You said it was done, she hissed. You said Calder was gone. He was, Harlan said, not even looking up. Guess he didn't get the memo. When I stepped into the room, Marla froze. Harlan turned slowly, his smirk curling like smoke. You look better broke than you ever did rich, he said. And you, I replied, look smaller than I remember. I dropped the metal box onto the coffee table with a hollow thud. Marla took a step back. Harlan didn't flinch. Let me guess, he said. More conspiracy theories? You really should have gone into fiction, brother. I flipped open the box, pulled out the old recorder, and pressed play. Edward's voice crackled through the room. Harlan, if you're hearing this, I failed to raise a man who values truth over power. You took from your brother what wasn't yours, and you'll pay for it. Marla gasped. Harlan's jaw tensed, but he kept quiet. Next, I laid out the drawings. 5 little pages. One undeniable truth. Marla reached for one, her fingers trembling. You wouldn't, she started. I cut her off. You already did. Footsteps echoed behind me. Royden entered with 2 detectives, calm, watchful. The taller one stepped forward, holding a file. "We've reopened the case on Edward Reese," he said. "Official cause of death is now under review. Preliminary findings suggest foul play." Harlan's mask cracked. "You have nothing," he snapped. "You can't." He lunged. But I was ready. I sidestepped, and he crashed into the table. The box tipped, spilling its contents across the floor. Edward's wooden cross, Lena's green pendant, and the silver watch. It skidded toward my feet. I bent down and picked it up. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I noticed something. An engraving inside the band. Faint, but there. "Justice is patient." I closed my hand around it. It wasn't vengeance. It was restoration. Harlan was cuffed. Marla stayed frozen, eyes wet with something between regret and fear. "For once," I said quietly, "he couldn't buy his way out. The price had already been paid, by every lie he told." We walked out as the sun rose over the hills. Royden met me at the steps and handed me a folder. Edward's verified will. I was reinstated. The company was mine again, but I barely looked at it. "This wasn't about the company anymore," I said. "It was about the little girl who still believes her father's good." Marla was led past me. Our eyes met for half a second. There was no hatred left in mine, just a door closing. Later that morning, I drove to the park where Lena and I used to count squirrels. The nanny's car was already there. When Lena saw me, she didn't hesitate. "Daddy!" she cried, running full speed. I dropped to my knees, arms wide. She slammed into me like a wave. The pendant still hung from her neck. "They said you were gone," she whispered. "I'm right here," I said. I always was. I pulled out the silver watch and placed it in her small hand. "This belonged to your great-uncle. He believed the truth matters more than anything." She looked at it, then at me. "I believe that too," she said. The weight lifted, not all at once, but enough to breathe again. They stole everything that could be counted, but not what mattered. The cross and the watch now rested in her hands. Legacy returned. Justice didn't come in courtrooms or boardrooms. It came at dawn, in a hug that outlasted everything money could buy. As we drove away, my phone buzzed on the console. Unknown number, one line of text. "There's one more box, Calder, and it's not Edward's."